Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
from sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Recover You. Today is a special episode. We have guests Matthew and Joanna Raabsmith. So welcome. We are so happy to have you today.
Thanks. It's so good to be here.
Yeah, excited to be a part of it.
Let me just give a quick intro for who you guys are, and then we'll jump into lots of questions about what you do and who you are and how you help people in the recovery space. Matthew and Joanna are sought-after relationship experts. With a shared passion for helping others find thriving intimacy, they have helped hundreds of couples find lasting connection. Drawing from their own journey of healing after experiencing the devastation of sexual addiction and betrayal in their marriage, Matthew and Joanna bring authenticity, hope, and practical wisdom. They have authored the book, Building True Intimacy, which we'll talk a little bit about today, which offers actionable strategies for couples to find better connection instantly. So make sure if you listen to this episode and you learned something, check out that link in the show notes as well. Make sure that is linked. But welcome. We're so happy to have you and to kind of jump into a little bit about who you guys are and what you do.
Yes.
So I thought maybe we could just start with a little bit of an introduction, sharing maybe some bullet points about your story. I know for anyone going through this process and attempting reconciliation, being able to see other couples that have succeeded and seem happy is a huge encouragement. So maybe share, like, how did that happen for you? A little bit about your story and who you are.
Yeah, we have made it and we are actually happy. So that's good.
Yay!
Check.
The only bad news is we're still working on it. So, I'm not sure what made it means, but we are out of the woods at least.
There you go. That's important.
Yeah. Relationally, we started about 15 years ago. We got married. We had a very whirlwind kind of romantic get together. We had 4 dates before we got engaged. It was like The Bachelor. We were going to like Field of Dreams and like all these like crazy things. And it wasn't actually The Bachelor. No. Just to be clear. It kind of felt like that. And we had an instant connection. We felt like there was something really special between the two of us. We both kind of uprooted our lives. We were in grad school separately. We said, screw that. We're going to just kind of sell everything. We got married. We moved to California. We went to grad school together. We were really on this track to want to do something. And interestingly enough, we wanted to do something with marriages. We wanted to help relationships because that's what we wanted. We wanted a great marriage.
And we kind of realized just because we wanted it didn't mean we got it.
Definitely did not have. We did not have the education.
A few years into marriage, we're like, okay, we're going to need to figure this out. And so we started trying to find different marriage, relationship resources, diving into things. Some things maybe helped a little. Some really didn't help much at all. We finally stumbled upon this kind of like group curriculum we went through when we were at grad school together, and then some follow-up therapy around that structure, which was based in restoration therapy, where we learned our couple cycle, basically, right? I learned about emotional dysregulation, how I cope in destructive ways when I'm feeling emotional pain. Those ways trigger Matthew's emotional pain, so he copes destructively, which triggers my pain. So I go right and round
Trigger
we go.
tennis. Yeah,
exactly. Oh, that's the thing we're doing. Okay, great. How do we stop that? And we actually learned how to stop it. It was pretty life-changing. And so we decided that I would go back to grad school and get my master's of marriage and family therapy. So we could we really wanted to learn to help couples understand those things, use the tools, and really create the relationship they want.
The one thing standing in the way of that was a hidden addiction. And so I had kept really my sexual life completely hidden from Joanna, both from kind of my past and my history. I had dropped little nuggets about I struggled with porn back in the day, but don't struggle anymore. And so what was happening was we were making a lot of progress in our relationship, but we were also feeling limited in our ability to connect. And And we would go into these cycles and patterns a lot, usually around my addiction and acting out cycles and patterns where we would feel really connected and then really disconnected and really connected and really disconnected. And Joanna was really, I think, struggling with that yo-yo experience. And we were both struggling with a feeling of like, we want our relationship to be better. And we don't know why. And I could even remember feeling that way. I mean, I knew I was acting out, but I was still so in the fog of my addiction that I never believed that it was actually affecting us. But over time, it became really clear. It was affecting us. And it took one person's story in one of Joanna's class. Someone came and gave a anonymous testimony about his journey into discovery, recovery, and then reconciliation ultimately with his wife around sexual addiction and pornography. And his story, Joanna heard in her class, and she brought it home and she told it to me. And at the end of telling that story, and she's telling me this story, and I'm starting to freak out because I'm like, oh, I think she's going to ask. And she did at the very end of the story. After I continued to not say anything, she just looked at me point blank and said, is this the thing that's going on? Is this what you're dealing with? And 3 years into our marriage, many years into my life with never telling a soul, I finally was honest and everything imploded, right? The dreams that we had, the ideas that we were going to be this incredible couple that did all this incredible work really came crashing down. It was a quiet moment, but it was a terrifying moment for us. And so on that day, we started recovery. That was 12 years ago. And we kind of approached recovery the way we approached our original marriage work, which was, we don't know anything about this. So if we're going to do it, we're going to have to figure it out. And so we kind of made our, committed to be experts about what recovery looked like. And Joanna, unfortunately, was, this all came out at a time when betrayal trauma was still just becoming a thing, right? It was kind of being talked about, but in most circles, it really wasn't known. So I had a lot of resources for me in sexual addiction. I could go to intensives and do some things like that. Joanna had very little. There was almost nothing, really very little for the couples. In fact, it was kind of like, good luck. Was the kind of approach, I think, at the time. And so we kind of entered in this space terrified because we wanted to survive, but how to survive, how to do it well was not something that we really felt like we could find. And we stumbled for a long time trying to figure out what healthy individual and couples recovery look like. And it was part of that stumbling, I think, that drove us into do what we do.
Sure.
Figured out a path, and we're like, okay, maybe we can share that path with others, but not the super long version we took. Maybe a more cleaned up version.
Right. Yeah, I think so many people end up going into this work have their own story, right? And then they find the gaps and the holes and the pain points. And they're like, I really want to help people maybe not fall into the same pit that we
Exactly.
We would definitely
danger. Don't go this way.
Right.
We were the 3 lefts to make a right. I was like, we could have just turned right there. That would have worked so much better.
Well, we won't get into this yet, but I know in the base of your pyramid is honesty. Is the foundation. And what's interesting about your story is that it was somebody owning their story, being willing to share it publicly, that allowed you guys to open the door to freedom and recovery, and now helping so many other people. So maybe how has embracing your story and processing the shame around it to the point where you are safe and happy to talk about it, how has embracing it as part of your life made a difference for you?
It came begrudgingly on my side. I want to be honest. We were
to be expected.
That was the glorious plan.
Even when we were doing well and we kind of knew we were going to work with couples again, I remember telling Joanna, we are not going to be the sex addiction couple. We're not going to be that weird couple that goes on and talks about sex and pornography, right? And so it was really funny that was a thing I thought. But I think it was that testimony, and I think we were cognizant of that we would not be where we were without that. And not even just those moments. I think we both individually had moments where other people shared their stories. I can remember some of the first times I heard guys' testimonies and first steps and confessions. And I got to share my testimony to guys first. And I think there were these little experiences over and over wrapped around story, right? When people were brave enough to tell their story, it always seemed to provide some level of healing.
Mm.
And when we started doing this work, even before we were really talking publicly a lot, I was always amazed at what people were willing to share in a coaching room with me, right? And what they were willing to really talk about that they never would. And so it just almost, I think, felt natural eventually that like this has to be part of who we are. We can't hide it anymore. Even though we're doing really well, we still had a sense of, well, maybe we don't have to talk about it. And once we first started talking about it, then it was the floodgates, I think.
Yeah. And so we're actually speaking at a conference this week around the power of narrative. So we're teaching, because this is pretty pivotal for, right, in our own story, but also the clients we work with, that point in their healing journey, where they are really owning their narrative and they are free from kind of the narrative doesn't control them anymore. They're controlling their narrative. And so learning that like the way we talk about our story can either keep me a prisoner of my pain, or it can be one of the keys that helps free me. And that's on both sides, right? Because there is definitely a piece for me as well, right? Like a sadness and a deep grief that like, this is my story. I never wanted my story of marriage to be one where I was betrayed, right? And so it was a wrestle for many years that like, okay, if we're doing work with couples, we're going to have to talk about our relationship. And I don't want to talk about our relationship because I'm not really happy with the way the story turned out, right? And so getting to the place where I could embrace the realities of our story and see the growth and see the opportunities and see what has come out of it. It doesn't make any of the pain okay, or right? Like we never say like we recommend this route to get to like really healthy, thriving intimacy, right? But if you find yourself there, you are empowered to choose what you do with that reality. And so I think on both sides, just like learning that and knowing it doesn't have to happen right away. So for the couples I work with, right, I say, we're going to revisit your narrative, right? We're going to see like in a year, how do you tell your story differently? But then there's also this piece of empowerment that I love to say, like, and what's the next chapter you want to write? So in a year, when I'm like, okay, guys, we're going to add to your narrative, what do you want to be writing? Right. Because the choices you're making on a daily basis will be shaping that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you talk about that and that you're going to talk about it at a conference, because you know, for both people, I think they come from a different perspective, but both are going to share the fear of essentially being found out, right? And part of healing is that this isn't my identity anymore. This is something that has happened to me. And if somebody finds out, it doesn't matter, because that's, to your point, there is a story around it now. There is healing around it. And so instead of being afraid of somebody finding out, being able to share without fear, and maybe not on a public platform like we have chosen to do. that's not the journey, and that's okay. But not being afraid of a family member or a friend maybe, or having these private conversations even. And I know sometimes that can be a really strong fear point for people for a really long time. So I love that you talk about that. What were maybe some of the hardest pieces of recovery, maybe individually, like as the betrayed partner, as the addict, and then maybe as the couple?
For me, the hardest part was being able to have the emotional fortitude to handle the impact of my actions. I think I started to see I was lucky because I got into some no nonsense programs that were not really about like, hey, take your time, get better when you want. I mean, they were like, this is going to kill you. You have 30 minutes. Right. And so I think I got some early freedom. I got, I had some really, really strong boundaries around my life. I cut everything out. I changed people, places, and things. And I got to experience that sobriety and that kind of freedom and that kind of like getting out of the fog really quickly. That was in some ways, easy part. The hard part was that when kind of I turned to Joanna and she's all of a sudden not the same person, right? She's having to deal with things she's never dealt with before. She's having emotions she's never had. She's talking to me in ways she's never had before. And I just as well as I was doing in recovery, my sense of identity was still pretty fragile and insecure. And so I would often get defensive. I would want to, when she would tell me, hey, this is what it feels like, I would be like, well, this is what's true. I'm a good husband. I would really want to state my case. And that didn't work. And it was all about this insecurity. And so
one of the first, was it a year, some way into sobriety, he came home from his meeting with his chip and his cupcake, and he's like, hey, the guys gave me a cake. Right? And I was like, that is mine. That is my cake. And no, you don't get a cake for being sober.
Right. That there's this concept with a betrayed partner is like, congratulations for doing the right thing. Yeah. Right. Yeah. There's that painful. Yeah. Good job. Yeah. But at the same time, you're their friend and you're like, good job. Like, I want to Yeah.
So holding that was hard. It took years, honestly, of struggling with that and really failing miserably at times to really be able to consistently hear Joanna, to really take on her perspective. That was the hardest, because I think I was so terrified of facing not just what I did, but it was the impact of what I did, the way that it had hurt people, the way that it had hurt Joanna specifically, and really kind of lifelong altering. And I think that I had never had in mind. Obviously, I didn't have in mind when I was doing it. That was one of the ways that I kind of tricked myself into believing that it wasn't the issue that I thought it was. And so when that came full force, as much work as I had done, I still had a lot of work to do to be able to hold that more consistently.
I think for me, it was, I think early on, the not knowing what I was going through, like Matthew kind of said earlier, there was not a lot on betrayal trauma at the time. It was much more codependent, co-addict. And I knew that did not fit at all for me. And so that was really isolating. I felt very alone, very isolated early on in recovery. And so that was super hard. And I think the other piece was kind of in response to what he shared, was like that being patient for some of those things to happen in our relationship that I think I knew needed to happen, but were not happening in the time frame that I wanted. Sure. And so waiting for that kind of compensation, waiting for him to be able to show up and understand my experience and kind of show up in a way that was healing around that experience. That took a really long time as well. And so there's definitely points in our journey where we were out of the crisis. We were pretty stable. There was a lot that was good, but I knew like, no, but there's still some out of balance. And there was some times that I wondered, like, will we ever get there? Or is it even possible, right? Did what we go through, does betrayal just mean like that's not in the cards for us in our relationship anymore? And I think there's a lot of grief around that and that not knowing, because again, at the time, there weren't all these wonderful podcasts with people sharing stories. And it was like, are there couples out there who made it and who are happy? Right? Like there was that big question mark. And so I think that in between time was really hard as well.
That being a pain point for both of you navigating that, was there something specific, a resource or therapy, or was it just something you eventually sort of figured out through the healing process of, how to empathize with the trauma of the betrayed partner and that sort of thing?
It's interesting. It's actually the work that we had done early in our relationship around restoration therapy, because the process is really about understanding your sense of self and sense of safety. And what's really freeing about it is realizing that I can speak to that myself. There are other people who can speak into it, but ultimately I have the power to speak into it as well. And so where most of our relationship, I had wanted Joanna to kind of name my identity, right? I wanted her to tell me that I was a good man, that I was capable, right? That I belonged and all these things, and that I was safe. And in a lot of ways, behaviorally, she showed up and did that, right? I mean, that was part of what drew me to her, is that she was an incredibly loving person, an incredibly safe person. But now I was kind of doing it, and she's kind of holding this weight. And I think she recognized, well, I can't hold your identity and your safety and mine all at the same time. And so part of it was recognizing, wait, no, I have the resources within myself to decide who I am. And Joanna's pain, the hurt that I've caused, right, that doesn't make me a monster. The actions were awful. The thing and the impact of those actions were awful. And I can grieve those without losing my sense of self. And so that, as I got better and better at recognizing that and being able to do that in real time, because I could kind of do it after, right? Like I'd usually blub it and come back and be like, I was really defensive. I won't do that again until like 20 minutes later, right? And so, and eventually I got to the point where I could see it in the moment, right? And I could be right in front of Joanna and she could be sharing something and I could tell that I would be shutting down and I would go, wait, hold on. I know I'm doing it right now. I know I'm not listening to you. I'm not connecting with your pain. I would take 60 seconds, really what all it would take to get right back into my sense of self and go, okay, let me see if I've got this right. And then I could validate, right? It was much easier to be empathetic.
And it was those small decisions in the moment to go a different way, happening consistently enough in our relationship that I could finally trust, okay, this is going to be different. This is going to be different moving forward. Not perfect, not 100% all the time, right? But enough that I can trust there's more for us, that we can continue healing and growing and pushing into vulnerability and intimacy in a way that we are not right now.
Yeah. Then the other thing I would say, just maybe mention, because I do think this is important. I can't remember if Joanna suggested it, if I kind of agreed to it. I think she'd probably ask it really early in our relationship, and I hadn't at the time. But I started studying betrayal trauma. I actually got trained as a betrayal trauma coach. I wanted to get to know the partner's experience because I recognized just hearing it from Joanna in her pain was hard, but I could read a book or I could read an article of somebody else, and that actually helped me, I think, show up more consistently because I could recognize, oh, okay, this isn't her hating me. This is what she's going through. This is the pain of what she went through. And
it's also not me having to teach him about my experience, right?
Which I think she appreciated.
Yeah.
And the cool part about this, I tell guys all the time, the cool part about it is I actually connected to my own story even deeper, as I understand, not because I'm a betrayed spouse, but because some of the pains and the injustices that betrayed spouses go through, I had gone through some of those similar experiences as a child. And so I was able to better connect with that history, and that made it easier to connect with her, right? It made it easier to go, oh, I see why justice around this is so important, why you feel like this needs to be made right, because that's how I feel about a lot of things that's happened to me, that I wish it had been made right. And so that, I think, helped us to connect as well.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's so important. So it was partially separating her trauma from your identity, but then it was also finding points at which you could relate to how and why someone was feeling that way, so that you could empathize in a deeper way. Yeah, so important. Would you say, so it sounded like your struggle points were essentially the same thing individually. Was that the primary issue you guys ran into as a couple going through recovery as well?
Yeah.
When you're trying to navigate the coupleship?
Because those would create these moments of disconnection, right? I mean, like Joanna said, we were pretty stable. I mean, she was in grad school, so we were really busy. And so I was working at least one or two jobs. We were in LA, so I was probably working about 9 jobs at the time. And so, we were busy. We were doing a lot to kind of just like piece by piece move forward. But the pain would come up, right? Something would trigger her or something would come up, and then we'd try to connect and it just would, kind of burst. And then we
wouldn't know what to do. So we just kind of shut down, withdraw, be disconnected for a while till we came back together in this kind of weird, awkward way of like, I guess we move on then just repeat.
Yeah. And so we were stable, but not moving forward.
Yeah.
Well, and you had mentioned earlier, really being a couple that was trying to be proactive about your relationship before you, Joanna, knew about the addictive side of things that were going on.
Yeah.
Maybe just touch on how that is so important, because they're two totally separate things. And we can try really hard to work on a marriage, but if we have this secret that is slowly like dissolving the foundation and we're unaware of it, we really can't overwork that.
You're not going to get anywhere.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And partly what was really nice is the modality that we found to work on a relationship gave us so many tools that were vital for recovery. And if Matthew would have used those tools to their full extent when we were doing the relational work, guess what? The porn addiction would come out. It would have been dealt with, right? But it was a decision to keep hiding those things that kept us really stuck.
Sure.
And so, which was, right, drives you crazy. And we work with so many couples who, they're like, we were in marriage counseling for 3 years and not making progress, right?
Right.
This came out.
Well,
we
that
work
almost,
with our own clients.
That almost feels like an additional betrayal for the betrayed spouse because they've been putting so much effort into something that can't move forward without
time, emotion, energy. And also what often happens is that partner is trying to, because they want to do their part, they're taking on responsibility that's not really theirs to take on.
Yes,
and I've seen so many partners do that, right? And so like you're saying, then it's this double betrayal of like, wait, you let me think that was my problem. A lot of times this will happen in the area of sexual dysfunction as a couple, right? Like, oh, it was framed as my issue and my problem when really the sexual issue was you were hiding it all along and it was impacting us in some really detrimental ways. So that's an example of that. But yeah, absolutely. But so going like, no, marriage work is not going to help at all until those individual pieces are dealt with. Now, thankfully, in that marriage work, like I talked about, we learned some crucial pieces for our individual journey. And so that piece of like self-understanding, self-regulation, like I have to know my identity. I have to decide my worth and my value apart from anyone else, right? You can imagine how important that is for a betrayed spouse. It would be really easy to go, oh, I guess that I wasn't enough for my spouse, right? Or that I will never be safe because what if they don't choose recovery? Like all of these pieces and going like, wait, no, I have control. I have some power over that. That is so healing. And then on the side of the addict or the betrayer, right? Like you're not going to really find freedom from that unless you're able to self-regulate, unless you're able to understand like what are the core pains, the emotions that are driving this out of control, destructive behavior. If I can understand the root, I'm going to have a lot more power over then stopping the behaviors. And so I think that was a piece that helped those individual parts. For us, as individual healing happened so quickly, much more easily. But once we got to the relational piece of restoring after betrayal, that was much trickier.
Sure. Yeah, it's a complicated thing. So that being said, you guys have created a little bit of a structure to help people visually understand what most couples need in order to make that happen. And I would say too, it's a normal thing for couples navigating this to really, we all wish we could just snap our fingers and we could get to the healing part, right? And so things like the intimacy pyramid, I think they are important to help people not just see the path, but to understand that there are steps and this does take time. It's a process. And truly with trauma and with betrayal, it really is something where both couples can quite literally be doing everything right. And it still takes time because that's just how it's created our nervous systems and our brains. And we have to build that trust over time. So let's talk about, share what the pyramid is and maybe what the steps are. And if you see any, what the most common pitfalls are and how this kind of helps couples navigate that.
Yeah, we wanted to create something simple, but still had space for the complexity. And we really liked this idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If anyone's familiar, right? The idea that I can't really be thinking about upper level needs like self-actualization and purpose if I don't feed myself, right? There's some basic needs that I have to take care of. And that's what we noticed with relationships, right? We can talk about intimacy and purpose and passion and playfulness all we want. But if we're not being honest with each other, right, if there is a lack of knowledge of information in the relationship, it all becomes almost impossible. And so that's where really things had to start, right? It had to start with honesty. And so the base is about being honest for the first time sometimes, like in our case, right? But maintaining that honesty, right? Day in and day out, learning how to be transparent and kind of communicate.
Yeah.
That's what allows you to then think about, how do we rebuild the safety of the relationship? How can we make this relationship one in which we're both putting in, like y'all were talking about, right? We're showing up to couples counseling and I feel like we're both working on this, but then we find out one of us actually wasn't working on the relationship, right? When I'm in addiction, I'm not working on my marriage. And so having to be able to go, okay, can I demonstrate that this relationship is safe? Because that's what's going to give way to trust, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And trust is where we get to start leaning in again, where it's less individual work. We're now able to really focus on repairing the relationship from the impacts of the betrayal. We're working as a team. We're starting to step towards each other. And as we do that, and as we build that trust, that's what creates enough stability to then become vulnerable with one another, to be able to step into that space where it's risky, right? This is one of the first big places we're asking both people to risk again. And we usually want to see that led by the betrayer because, again, they were the one not showing up vulnerably, not showing up in honesty. And so it's a way to demonstrate trustworthiness, stepping in, saying, okay, I'm ready to show up with my whole self and be vulnerable. And that invitation then to that betrayed spouse to step in and join in that vulnerability. And that is what paves the way for that intimacy, that ultimate goal of kind of what you're working towards.
And what we love about the when we made this framework, just how we've used it in our own relationship, is it's really nice to think about how do we get to the intimacy level, right? And we have a lot of couples when we draw it up on our board for the first time, they're like, yes, I want all those things at the top, but we'll also explain to them that what's kind of cool is when you get to the top, you usually go back through and you work through everything again. We consistently work on honesty in our relationship, not because there's deception like there was before, but because we realize there's ways that I can be more aware, more authentic, right? More assertive in how we communicate. And so each of these pieces of the puzzle become parts of our relationship that we work on as we see, I think there needs to be some more trust, right? Or some more vulnerability in our relationship to be even stronger.
Yeah. And, I think you've sort of alluded to this a little bit, how this is not a process we would ever ask for, but it really opens the door for so much healing because every couple really should be basing their relationship on this pyramid, right? Like every relationship should have this really strong foundation of honesty and safety and trust. And this, it was almost just like the catalyst that forces couples to have to, if we're going to survive, we have to do these things.
Exactly. 100%. Our book, Building True Intimacy, actually is written for all couples. And so we kind of frame it like this is what we learned from working with betrayal couples, right? How to build healthy, thriving intimacy. But then we realized, this is just the way we should all be building all along.
Right.
And when we don't, that's when it comes crashing down around us. So, okay, now as we're rebuilding, let's do it the right way this time.
Now, to clarify, people hear the word intimacy, and that I'm assuming at the top of the pyramid, it's not just physical intimacy.
Correct.
This is how you accomplish emotional connection and, all this safety and grounding in your relationship kind of thing. But physical intimacy does tend to be tricky for couples re-engaging after betrayal. Can you maybe speak a little bit to that? If we wanted to zoom out, sometimes people will be hyper or hyposexual after betrayal as some sort of, they're trying to rebalance here. And sort of like you mentioned a moment ago, sometimes it's like, well, if we can just get to that point, then maybe we'll be okay. If we can engage physically, maybe it will, Band-Aid all of our problems and help us emotionally feel better. And that's maybe not the best way to do it. So can you maybe just speak to why this is important to have, you utilize the pyramid even with physical intimacy and, reconnecting in a healthy way from that perspective.
Yeah. Hopefully my sex addicts, sisters and brethren out there are going, sex to feel better is not the path that you need to be on. And so, but we do recognize that these are couples who are married. They're couples that may be experiencing the first type of like deeper connection. A lot of times partners will say like, he's being honest, right? He's being vulnerable. He's being things that he's never been before. And it's driving me to want to connect physically with him, right? And so we recognize that this complexity is different for every couple. That's why we usually say, like, having professionals who can walk with you, who can help you kind of make those particular decisions. But what's really great is the process of sexual reintegration is the exact same process. And it often lags behind emotional intimacy and kind of those kind of things. And so we will usually say, like, if you do not have emotional safety, having physical intimacy is putting a lot of pressure on that relationship, right? And on that system to really be able to hold it. So just be aware of maybe kind of what's going on relationally with you, because sexual intimacy will not create emotional or relational safety. And so knowing that may kind of temper what you decide to do. But it's still a process of wanting to rebuild the right way. We wanted a healthy sex life in our future, but we understood that because of just the fact that I had been engaging in pornography in a kind of really broken sexual framework for 20 plus years of my life, there needed to be some cleaning up, some fixing of both what I brought in and then what we manifested together as a couple.
Yeah, so we really recommend couples start at the bottom, start in honesty, right? Just like we don't say emotionally dive into intimacy, we're going to build. It's the same way, right? And so starting with honesty looks like building self-awareness around your own story sexually. And that's for both individuals. What are the sexual narratives that I picked up growing up, right? Where did I get my sexual education? What were my sexual experiences like? Okay, now we're going to share those things with each other. We're going to talk about it. What was our sexual past like as a couple, right? So for so many couples, there was a pretty toxic sexual relationship as well, that maybe the addiction was present in some way or showing up in. Maybe there was sexual anorexia, maybe it was a lack of sexuality, right? All sorts of things. So we also have to understand our story as a couple and what that was, because that's going to impact greatly the type of sexuality we're building in our future if we want it to be healthy. And so if there is a dynamic where there was a lot of pressure from the betraying spouse on the betrayed spouse to have sex or so frequently, or the type of sex you have, or things like that, where they were not given a choice or not much choice, right? That dynamic will have to be different moving forward if healing is going to be created. And so you have to talk about it. You have to name it. You have to talk about it. You have to decide together, agree together what you want moving forward. And then there needs to be accountability around that, right? So same thing, honesty, safety, trust, vulnerability, and then intimacy. And so it may seem like a really long process or tedious. It doesn't have to be, right? Like, it's amazing how sometimes couples can move through that fairly quickly, but sometimes it does need to be. Sometimes it takes years for couples to be able to build a healthy sexuality together. It's so unique, but doing it in a healthy way is what is consistent around healing.
Yeah, and I love that you sort of shared how, the spectrum, how different it can be for couples. And so maybe even someone listening, just taking the pressure off and going, there is not necessarily a right or wrong here. It is what is following this process and making sure that the safety is there, making sure that you're communicating, making sure that you're connecting. And then for each couple, that timeline is going to look very, very different. And there's nothing wrong with you. If you're maybe comparing or hearing maybe somebody else in your support group is, doing it differently or whatever, but that's so unique to you, your own trauma, your own recovery, your own coupleship, and kind of the things that you're working through together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Share maybe just a little bit how you guys work with couples. What do you offer? How people can find you? What I know I think you work with individuals and you have programs for couples as well. So maybe talk about that just a little bit.
Absolutely.
We do a little bit of it all in terms of in this realm. What we love to do is we love to see people have reconciliation and restoration. And so the heart of our work as a team is kind of couples helping couples. So everybody on our team has been through it. Everybody on our team has trained to lead it. And now we get the really joyful opportunity of walking both individuals and couples through it. We do individual coaching. We have a really fun couples group program for couples who've been in recovery for a little bit. But ultimately, it's really just about helping people kind of find that journey. The best way to find us and to find out about us is on our website, Raabsmithteam.com. We're the only Raabsmiths in the whole world. So if you can get Raabsmith into a search engine, you can find us.
Perfect.
And one of the things that we've loved to do, because we ate up resources when we were starting out, especially free ones, because we were broke when we went through recovery. We've always loved giving away resources. And as we were talking about, we needed a way to connect, but a safe way to connect. And so we created a check-in, because that was one of the really healing pieces for us, was doing a daily check-in, being able to talk about our individual journeys, but also be able to do it in a kind of relationally safe way. And so we made a check-in a few years back that our clients have really loved, and it's available. You can get that on our website. You actually go to Raabsmiththeam.com/free. We'd love to give that away. There's a little 30-day guide to kind of get you going. Make sure you do it the right way. And if you stumble, right, we're kind of there to help. But that's just something we love to give to people so they can do the journey a lot on their own.
Perfect. Well, we'll make sure to have the book in the show notes. We'll have that link to the free resource in the show notes as well, so people can check you out and find you. Is there any piece of encouragement that you would like to leave individuals or couples with today who are navigating this journey?
I think the knowledge that you're not alone. As when we were in this, we really wondered, are we the only couple that made it? Or, did anyone?
True, yeah. This
is when we weren't even sure that we had made it. It was did we make it? Is anybody else doing okay? The good news is you are. We have had so much fun graduating couples, right? When we get to say, you don't need us anymore, that's the best day of our work. And there are so many couples that we can speak to just in our own practice. But just around the country, around the world, who are doing really well in recovery. And so I think regardless of where you are in that journey, knowing that there's somebody here who's been here before, but also been on the other side, right? They've been to that next place is such an encouragement, something that I wanted to hear so much when we were going through this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think for me, sticking with that theme of narrative, you have the power to reclaim your narrative. And I think especially if there are people listening who aren't sure their partner is on board with healing or don't know if they're going to make it or where their story is going, or there's just a lot up in the air, a lot of question marks, a lot of pain still, knowing when you commit to your healing journey, you do have the power to create a story that you are excited about, that you are passionate about in that future. And so don't give up. Keep doing the work. Reach out, find community support resources that are as excited about your healing journey as you are, who are going to help you through those times when it feels overwhelming and it feels hard and it feels like you can't go on, right? Because we all have those moments. But yeah, I think that would be my encouragement.
Well, thank you both so much for your honesty, your vulnerability, your commitment to encouraging individuals and couples through this. You and I have both said similar things in that when we were going through it, we were looking for couples, we were looking for that hope. And so you're out here offering that. It means a lot to so many people. We really, really appreciate you being on the podcast today, sharing your story, sharing your resources. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us. Really enjoyed it.
Remember that every day is a new opportunity to choose health and freedom. Make that choice today, and we will see you next week. Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.